The barn was already smoking when Delilah Wright threw open the chicken coop door, flames licking at the dry wood of her property like hungry wolves closing in on wounded prey. She could barely see through the thick gray smoke that billowed across her small ranch on the outskirts of Coloma, California, but she heard her hens squawking in terror, and that was enough to send her running straight toward danger with her skirts hiked up around her knees. It was August of 1852, and the summer had been merciless. Every blade of grass had turned brown and brittle, every wooden structure a tinderbox waiting for a spark. That spark had come from somewhere. Maybe a lightning strike from the dry storm that had rolled through an hour earlier. Maybe an ember from someone's campfire carried on the wind. The why didn't matter now. What mattered was that everything she owned was about to burn to ashes, and her chickens were trapped. Come on," she muttered, reaching into the coop, even as the heat from the nearby barn made sweat pour down her face. Her fingers closed around warm feathers, and she pulled out Henrietta, her best laying hen, tucking the panicked bird under one arm. She reached for another, then another, her eyes watering from the smoke. That was when she heard it. Laughter. Deep, rich, and completely inappropriate given the circumstances. Delilah spun around, clutching 3 chickens to her chest, and saw him. A man on horseback, sitting there like he had all the time in the world, watching her with amusement dancing in his dark eyes. He was tall even sitting down, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and black hair that curled slightly at the ends where it touched his collar. A cowboy, clearly from his worn leather chaps to the hat, pushed back on his head. "What in God's name is funny?" she shouted over the roar of the flames. He swung down from his horse with an easy grace, still grinning. "Madam, your barn is about to collapse, and you're arguing with a chicken." "I am not arguing, I am saving. Only you would argue with fire," he said. And despite the severity in his voice, there was warmth there too. He strode past her, moving with purpose toward her well. "Get those birds away from here. I'll see what I can do about the barn." "You cannot possibly but move." His command was sharp enough that she obeyed without thinking, running toward the far fence line with her armload of chickens. She deposited them in a hasty pile, their indignant clucking following her as she ran back toward the coop. The stranger was already hauling up bucket after bucket of water, his movements efficient and practiced. He had stripped off his shirt at some point, and she found herself momentarily distracted by the play of muscles across his back before she shook herself and grabbed another bucket. "The barn is lost," he called to her. "We need to keep it from spreading to your house." She knew he was right, but it still hurt to watch the structure where she had kept her 2 horses, her milk cow, and all her hay go up in flames. Thank God the animals had been in the small pasture today, or she would have lost them too. Together, they worked in frantic silence, hauling water and throwing it onto the side of her house that faced the barn. The heat was intense, nearly unbearable, and more than once she felt like her lungs were going to give out from the smoke inhalation. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, the stranger grabbed her arm. "It is spreading too fast. We need to create a fire break." "What?" "We burn a line between the barn and everything else. Controlled. It will consume the fuel before the main fire reaches it." He was already moving, grabbing a torch from her porch. "Do you trust me?" It was an absurd question. She did not even know his name, but when she looked into his eyes, she saw competence and determination, not recklessness. Yes. They worked together to light a careful line in the dry grass, and she understood his strategy immediately. The smaller fire would consume the grass and create a bare patch of earth that the larger fire could not cross. It was risky, dangerous even, but it was also brilliant. As they worked, she became aware of other people arriving. News of the fire must have reached town. Men from Coloma came with more buckets, more willing hands, and within another hour the barn had collapsed into smoldering ruins, but the fire had been contained. Delilah stood in her yard, covered in soot and ash, staring at the destruction. Her barn was gone, her winter hay supply was gone. The coop was damaged but standing. Her house had survived, though the side facing the barn would need serious work. It could have been so much worse. It should have been worse. She turned to find the stranger, to thank him, and found him leaning against the well, breathing hard. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought. Maybe 24 or 25, only a few years older than her own, 22 years. His face was streaked with soot, and there was a burn on his forearm that he seemed to be ignoring. "You are hurt," she said. She straightened her spine, trying to summon some dignity, despite the fact that she looked and probably smelled like she had been dragged through a campfire. "Please, it is the least I can do." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Zachariah Xander, madam. Delilah Wright. Though I suppose you can call me Delilah, seeing as you just saved everything I own." She led him toward her house, very aware of the curious looks from the other men who were still damping down hot spots. Let them look. She had nursing to do. Inside, her house was untouched by the fire, though it smelled of smoke. She directed Zachariah to sit at her kitchen table while she fetched her medical supplies. Her hands were shaking, she realized. The shock was setting in now that the immediate danger had passed. "Let me see that arm," she said, setting down a basin of clean water and her tin of salve. He held it out obediently, and she winced at the angry red burn that blistered his forearm. "This needs to be cleaned. It will hurt. I have had worse." She believed him. There were other scars on his arms, on his chest. This was a man who had lived a hard life. She worked carefully, cleaning the burn with gentle touches, very aware of how close they were sitting. He smelled of smoke and sweat and something else, something that might have been sage or cedar. It was not unpleasant. "Where are you from?" she asked, partly to distract him and partly because she was genuinely curious. "Texas originally, been drifting for a few years now, came to California for the gold like everyone else, but the mining did not suit me. Been working cattle ranches mostly." His voice was steady despite the pain she must be causing him. "I was passing through on my way to Sacramento when I saw the smoke." "Thank God you did." She applied the salve carefully, then began wrapping his arm with clean cloth. "I do not know what I would have done if you had not stopped." "You would have gotten yourself killed trying to save those damn chickens," he said, but there was no judgment in his tone. "Why did you go for them first?" Delilah tied off the bandage and sat back. "They are alive. They depend on me. Everything else can be rebuilt." Zachariah looked at her with something like wonder in his eyes. "You are either the bravest woman I have ever met or the most foolish." "Perhaps both." She managed a tired smile. "Would you like some coffee? I think I need something to steady my nerves." "I would appreciate that." She busied herself with the coffee pot, grateful for something to do with her hands. Through the window, she could see the other men dispersing, their work done. Someone would need to keep watch through the night to make sure nothing flared up again, but the immediate crisis was over. She tried not to think about what came next, how she would afford to rebuild the barn, how she would feed her animals through the winter without hay, how she would manage any of this alone. Her husband had been dead for 8 months. Jacob had been a good man, but not a particularly practical one. He had died in a mining accident up in the hills, leaving her with this small ranch and very little money. She had been making it work through sheer stubbornness, but this fire might be the thing that finally broke her. "Do you have family who can help?" Zachariah asked, as if reading her thoughts. "No, my parents died on the trail west. Jacob's family is back in Missouri, and we were not close with them." She poured 2 cups of coffee and brought them to the table. "It is just me." "What about neighbors?" "The McAllisters are good people, but they have their own troubles. The drought has been hard on everyone." She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drawing comfort from it. "I will figure something out. I always do." Zachariah sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. "You need to rebuild that barn before winter." "I am aware. That takes money and labor." "Also aware. I could help." She blinked at him. "What?" "I am between jobs. I can swing a hammer, and you need the help." He set down his cup. "I am not asking for charity. You would feed me, let me sleep in your hayloft, once there is a hayloft again, and pay me whatever you can afford when the work is done." It was a generous offer. Too generous. Delilah had learned the hard way that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. "Why would you do that?" "Because you need help, and I am able to give it." He met her eyes steadily. "And because anyone stubborn enough to run into a burning barn to save chickens deserves a fighting chance to keep her home." She wanted to say yes. God, she wanted to say yes so badly. But she was also aware of how it would look, a young widow living alone with a young unmarried man. Coloma was a rough mining town, but people still talked. "I do not know if that would be appropriate. Then I will sleep in the shed by your pasture, or under the stars." I do not care much, to be honest. I have spent most of the last 2 years sleeping on the ground anyway. He leaned forward. Miss Wright, I am not asking to court you or compromise you. I am asking to help you rebuild your barn, nothing more. The straightforward honesty in his voice decided her. She needed help, and he was offering it. Everything else was just pride and worry about what other people might think. All right. Yes, thank you. His smile was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Good. We will start tomorrow, once we have assessed the damage properly and figured out what supplies we need. They talked logistics until the coffee was gone and the sun was setting. Zachariah insisted on checking the property one more time before dark, making sure nothing was still smoldering. Delilah rounded up her scattered chickens, relieved to find that all 12 had survived her hasty rescue. She got them settled in a makeshift pen made from some old fencing and gave them extra feed to calm them down. When darkness finally fell, Zachariah made a bed for himself in the small shed, refusing her offer of blankets with the assertion that the August night was plenty warm enough. Delilah retreated to her house, exhausted but too keyed up to sleep. She washed the soot from her skin and hair, changed into a clean nightgown, and sat by her window looking out at the ruins of her barn. A week ago, her biggest worry had been whether her vegetable garden would survive the drought. Now she was facing the possibility of losing everything, saved only by the intervention of a stranger who had happened to ride by at exactly the right moment. It felt like fate, though she was not sure she believed in such things. She thought about Zachariah Xander, about the way he had moved with such confidence in the face of danger, the way he had laughed at her for saving chickens, even while clearly admiring her for it. She thought about his offer to stay and help, given with no expectation of anything in return. It had been a long time since anyone had simply helped her, without wanting something. Finally, as the moon rose high and silver, she went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new worries, but tonight she was grateful to simply be alive with a roof still over her head. She woke to the sound of hammering. Delilah dressed quickly and hurried outside to find Zachariah already at work. He had cleared away some of the burned timber from the barn and was salvaging what pieces were still usable. In the early morning light, she could see the full extent of the damage. The barn was a total loss. The chicken coop would need significant repairs. The fence line closest to the barn had burned through in places. "You are up early," she called out. He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Habit. The sun rises. I get to work." He gestured at the sorted piles of wood around him. "Some of this is still good. We can reuse it, but we are going to need to buy new lumber for most of the structure. How much do you think it will cost?" He gave her a number that made her stomach drop. She had some money saved, but not nearly that much. "I see. We can do it in stages," he said quickly. "Build a basic structure first, just enough to shelter your animals and hay. Make improvements later when you have more funds." It was a sensible plan. She nodded, trying to project confidence she did not feel. "All right, I will go into town this morning and talk to Mr. Patterson at the lumber yard, see what kind of deal I can work out. I will come with you. We need other supplies too, nails and such. And I want to make sure he does not try to overcharge you." She appreciated that more than she could say. "Let me make breakfast first. You cannot work on an empty stomach." They ate together in her kitchen, and Delilah found herself relaxing in his company. Zachariah was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor that emerged once he was comfortable. He told her stories about his time in Texas, about the ranch where he had grown up before his father lost it to debts. She told him about her journey west, about meeting Jacob and their brief marriage, about her determination to make this ranch work no matter what. "You love it here," he observed. "I do. California is not what I expected, but it is mine. Or it can be, if I can hold on to it." She cleared their plates. "Ready to face town?" "As ready as I will ever be." The ride into Coloma was pleasant despite the circumstances. Delilah drove her wagon with Zachariah sitting beside her, his presence somehow reassuring. The town was bustling as always, full of miners and merchants and opportunists of every stripe. News of the fire had already spread, and several people stopped them to ask questions or offer sympathies. Mr. Patterson at the lumber yard was sympathetic but firm. He could give her a small discount, but lumber was expensive and in high demand. They negotiated for nearly an hour before settling on a price that was slightly better than his original offer, but still more than Delilah wanted to pay. She counted out her precious savings, watching the bills disappear with a heavy heart. "We will need to arrange delivery," Zachariah said. Can you bring it out to the right ranch by the end of the week? Should be able to manage that, Mr. Patterson agreed. He looked between them curiously. You are working for Mrs. Wright, then? I am helping her rebuild, Zachariah said evenly. I see. The man's tone suggested he saw a great deal, most of it probably improper. Delilah felt her cheeks heat, but she kept her chin high. Let people think what they wanted. She needed help, and she was getting it honestly. They completed their other errands and were loading supplies into the wagon when a woman's voice called out, Delilah! Oh, my dear, I heard about the fire. How dreadful! Delilah turned to see Margaret McAllister hurrying toward her, concern written all over her kind face. Margaret and her husband owned the ranch neighboring Delilah's, and they had been good friends since Delilah first arrived in California. Mrs. McAllister, it is good to see you. Thomas and I wanted to come help yesterday, but we did not hear about it until it was already over. Margaret's eyes slid to Zachariah with obvious curiosity. I see you had assistance, though. This is Mr. Xander. He happened to be passing by and helped contain the fire. He has generously agreed to help me rebuild. Delilah made the introductions quickly, watching Margaret's expression shift from curiosity to something like concern. How fortunate, Margaret said slowly. Mr. Xander, we are very grateful for your help with the fire. Delilah is dear to us. The subtle warning in her tone was clear. Zachariah seemed to pick up on it too, because he nodded respectfully. Miss Wright is lucky to have good neighbors. I am just providing temporary labor, nothing more. Of course. Margaret did not look entirely convinced, but she let it drop. Delilah, you must come to dinner this week. I insist. You have been through a terrible ordeal and could use friendly company. I would like that very much, Delilah said honestly. They parted ways with promises to visit soon, and Delilah and Zachariah headed back to the ranch. She was quiet on the drive, thinking about Margaret's reaction, about what everyone in town must be thinking. She is worried about your reputation, Zachariah said after a while. I know. I could find somewhere else to stay, come out during the day to work. Where? There is nowhere between here and town except the McAllister Ranch, and that would defeat the purpose. She shook her head. I appreciate your consideration, but I cannot let gossip dictate my decisions. I need help rebuilding, and you are providing that help. If people want to assume the worst, that is their failing, not mine. He was quiet for a moment, then smiled slightly. You are quite something, Miss Wright. Delilah, if we are going to be working together, you might as well use my name. Delilah, then, and you can call me Zach. Zachariah always sounds too formal to my ears. Zach, she repeated, testing the name. It suited him somehow. All right. They spent the afternoon continuing to clear the debris from the barn site. It was hot, dusty work, but they fell into an easy rhythm. Zach was strong and capable, moving the heavy timbers with apparent ease. Delilah focused on the smaller tasks, salvaging nails from burned wood, organizing materials, planning where things would go in the new structure. As the day wore on, she found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking. There was something compelling about the way he moved, efficient but never hurried. He had rolled up his sleeves despite the burns on his arm, and she could see the muscles in his forearms flexing as he worked. It had been a long time since she had noticed a man that way, and the realization made her uncomfortable. She had loved Jacob. He had been gentle and kind, if not particularly strong or practical. Their marriage had been more companionship than passion, but it had been good in its way. She had mourned him honestly when he died, but it had been 8 months now, and she was still young. Was it wrong to find another man attractive? You are thinking too hard, Zach said, making her jump. He had appeared beside her without her noticing. I can practically hear the wheels turning in your head. Just planning, she lied. Planning what? Where to put me to work next? His eyes crinkled with amusement. I am already working. You can plan something else. She laughed despite herself. You are impossible. So I have been told. He wiped his hands on his pants. We have done enough for today, I think. The lumber will not arrive until later this week anyway. Tomorrow we should focus on repairing your chicken coop and fixing that fence line. The immediate necessities. That makes sense. She looked at the cleared area where her barn had stood. They had made good progress, but there was still so much to do. Thank you, Zach, for all of this. You do not need to keep thanking me. I do, though. You could have kept writing. You did not have to stop, and you certainly did not have to stay. He met her eyes, and there was something in his expression she could not quite read. Maybe I needed a reason to stop drifting. The words hung between them, weighted with meanings she was not ready to examine. She looked away first, suddenly flustered. I should start dinner. You must be starving. I could eat, he agreed easily, and the moment passed. Dinner that night was simple, but filling, and they ate together at her kitchen table as the sun set. Delilah found herself telling him more about her life, about her dreams for the ranch, about the struggles of trying to make it alone. He listened more than he talked, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and genuine. After dinner, she walked out with him to the shed where he was sleeping. The night was clear and warm, the stars brilliant overhead. I wish I had better accommodations to offer you. This is luxury compared to some places I have slept, he assured her. Besides, I like sleeping outside. Feels more natural than being boxed in by walls. Still, she hesitated, then added, if you need anything, do not hesitate to ask. You are doing me an enormous favor. We are helping each other, he corrected gently. You are giving me purpose and a place to be. That is worth more than you might think. She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to understand the shadows she sometimes saw in his eyes. But it was too soon, too presumptuous. Instead, she simply said, "Good night, Zach. Good night, Delilah." The next few days fell into a comfortable pattern. They worked from sunrise to sunset, repairing the damage and preparing for the barn reconstruction. Zach fixed the chicken coop with surprising skill, building it back stronger than before. They mended fences together, with Delilah holding posts steady while Zach hammered them into place. In the evenings, they ate together and talked, learning more about each other with each conversation. Delilah learned that Zach had been drifting since he was 19, after his father's death left him with nothing. He had worked a dozen different jobs in half as many towns, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. He was restless, he admitted, always looking for something he could not quite name. "What about you?" he asked one evening. "You came all the way to California and married a man you barely knew. That takes either courage or desperation." "Both," she admitted. "My parents were dead. I had nothing tying me to Missouri except bad memories. Jacob offered security and companionship. It seemed like enough at the time. But it was not?" She considered the question carefully. "It was what it was. We were fond of each other. We worked well together, mostly. But I would be lying if I said it was a grand passion." "Do you believe in grand passion?" His tone was curious rather than mocking. "I do not know. Maybe. I suppose I would like to." She smiled wryly. "Is that foolish?" "No." He said it with such certainty that she looked at him in surprise. "Everyone deserves to be loved like that, completely, without reservation." "Have you ever felt that way about someone?" "No," he admitted, "but I keep hoping I will." The lumber arrived on Friday, and on Saturday they began the real work of reconstruction. Thomas McAllister rode over that morning, ostensibly to see how things were progressing, but really to assess Zach. Delilah could tell her neighbor was protective of her, and she appreciated it, even as she found it slightly amusing. "You know your way around a construction site," Thomas observed, watching Zach work. "I have built a few barns in my time," Zach replied easily. "Worked on a big cattle ranch in Texas for 2 years. We were always building or repairing something." "Texas, eh? What brings you to California?" "Same thing that brings everyone. Opportunity." Zach hammered in a nail with precise strikes. "Though I found mining was not for me, better with animals and honest work." Thomas seemed satisfied with that answer. He stayed for a few hours, helping with the framing, and by the time he left, Delilah could tell he approved of Zach. That was a relief. She valued the McAllisters' opinion, and it would make everything easier if they did not disapprove of the arrangement. The barn took shape slowly over the following weeks. It was hard work, exhausting, and sometimes frustrating, but there was also something satisfying about watching the structure rise from the ashes of the old one. Zach worked tirelessly, and Delilah did everything she could to help, fetching tools, holding boards steady, learning as they went. They worked well together, she realized. They had developed an unspoken rhythm, anticipating what the other needed without having to ask. More than once, she would reach for a tool only to find Zach already handing it to her. Or she would move to brace a board, and he would already be adjusting his position to make it easier for her. As the weeks passed, she became increasingly aware of him in other ways too. The way his shirt pulled across his shoulders when he lifted something heavy. The sound of his laugh when she said something that amused him. The way he looked at her sometimes, like she was something precious and unexpected. She was falling for him. The realization came one evening as they sat on her porch, exhausted from a long day, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. She looked over at him, at his profile silhouetted against the fading light, and felt her heart clench with something that was definitely not just gratitude. This was dangerous. She barely knew him. He was drifting through, helping her rebuild, and then he would move on. That had been the agreement. She could not afford to let her heart get tangled up in something that had no future. But it was already too late, she realized. She had fallen, and there was no climbing back up. "You are quiet tonight," Zach observed. "Just tired," she said, which was not entirely a lie. "We have been pushing hard. Maybe we should take tomorrow easier, rest a bit." He stretched, wincing slightly. "I am not as young as I used to be." "You are 25 at most," she said with a laugh. "Hardly ancient." 24, actually, but some days I feel about 90. He grinned at her. "How old are you, if you do not mind me asking?" 22, though I feel ancient too sometimes." "You are too young to be a widow," he said quietly. "Too young to be fighting so hard just to survive. I do not have much choice. You could sell, go somewhere easier." The suggestion made her defensive. "This is my home. I am not giving it up just because things are hard." "I know, that is not what I meant." He held up a hand. "I just mean you have options. You do not have to do this alone." "I am not alone. You are here." "For now." Something flickered across his face. "But I will not be here forever." The words stung more than they should have. "I know that. We had an agreement. You help rebuild the barn, then you move on." "I understand." "Do you?" He was looking at her intently now. "Because I am not sure I understand it anymore." Her heart was pounding. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I came here planning to help you rebuild and then drift on to the next job, the next town. But somewhere along the way, that changed." He stood up, pacing to the edge of the porch. "I like it here. Delilah, I like working with you, talking with you. I like the way you argue with chickens and run toward danger instead of away from it. I like who I am when I am with you." She could barely breathe. "Zach, I know it is too soon. You were married 8 months ago. You are probably still grieving, and we barely know each other, not really." He turned to face her. "But I need you to know that I am not staying just out of obligation. I am staying because I want to." She stood, crossing to him on unsteady legs. "I am not grieving anymore. I mean, I am sad that Jacob died. But I grieved him honestly, and I have moved on." She took a deep breath. "And I like you too. More than I should, probably. More than is wise given that you will be leaving soon." What if I did not leave? The question hung between them, full of possibility and risk. "What would you do here?" she asked. "You said yourself you get restless." Maybe I was restless because I had not found a reason to stay in one place. He reached out hesitantly, and she took his hand. His palm was calloused and warm against hers. "Maybe I have found that reason now." "It is too fast," she whispered, even as she stepped closer to him. "I know. People will talk. Let them. I do not want you to stay out of obligation or pity. That is not why I am staying." He lifted his free hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing along her cheekbone. "I am staying because the thought of leaving makes me feel hollow. I am staying because I want to see what this could become." She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "I am scared. So am I." His voice was barely above a whisper. "But I am more scared of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what if." When she opened her eyes, he was so close she could see the gold flecks in his brown irises. "Kiss me," she said, and he did. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them testing this new territory. But then she pressed closer, and his arms came around her, and the kiss deepened into something that made her knees weak and her heart race. This was different from anything she had experienced with Jacob. This was heat and hunger, and a desperate need that made her feel alive, in a way she had forgotten was possible. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably go sleep in the shed now, before I do something we will both regret." "I would not regret it," she said honestly. He laughed a little shakily. That makes this even harder." He pulled back, putting a respectable distance between them. "I want to do this right, Delilah. I want to court you properly. Let people get used to the idea of us. I do not want anyone questioning your honor or mine." She appreciated that, even as her body protested the distance. "You are right. Of course, you are right." "I will see you in the morning," he said, backing toward the steps. "Good night, Zach." "Good night." She watched him walk to the shed, then went inside on trembling legs. She felt like she had been struck by lightning, every nerve ending alive and singing. She had not been looking for this, had not even thought herself ready for it, but it had found her anyway, and now she had to decide what to do about it. Sleep was a long time coming that night. The next few weeks were both wonderful and frustrating. Zach was true to his word about courting her properly. He continued sleeping in the shed, despite the fact that the barn was now finished enough that he could have moved into the loft. He was always respectful, keeping a careful distance in public, though in private they allowed themselves the luxury of stolen kisses and long conversations that stretched late into the night. They finished the barn in early October, just as the first hints of autumn began to cool the relentless California heat. It was a simple structure, not as large as the original, but it was solid and well built. Delilah's animals finally had proper shelter again, and there was room to store the hay she had managed to purchase with her dwindling funds. "We did it," she said, standing back to admire their work. "It is beautiful." "It is a barn," Zach said, but he was smiling. "But yes, we did good work. What now?" He turned to her. "Now, I guess I need to find paying work. I cannot live off your hospitality forever." "You have more than earned your keep." She had been dreading this moment, when he would decide what came next. "Are you going to look for work around here, or move on?" "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you want me to stay." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I meant what I said, Delilah. I want to be here, but I need to be able to support myself, contribute something more than just labor." "Thomas mentioned he might be looking for help with his cattle," she offered, "and I know the Bennett Ranch is always hiring hands. I will ask around." He squeezed her hand. "I am not going anywhere unless you tell me to." She kissed him then, right there in broad daylight where anyone might see. "I am not telling you to." He got hired on at the Bennett Ranch the following week, working cattle for decent wages. It meant he was gone during the days, but he came back every evening, and gradually his things migrated from the shed to the barn loft, and then, eventually, into her house. People in town noticed, of course. There was gossip, some of it kind and some of it less so. But the McAllisters stood by them, and most people seemed willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. 3 months after the fire, on a cold December evening, Zach asked her to marry him. They were in her kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when he suddenly went still. "Delilah, I have been thinking." "That is always dangerous," she teased. "I am serious." He dried his hands on a towel and turned to face her. "We have been dancing around this for months now. Everyone in town assumes we are together anyway. And I love you. I have loved you probably since that first day when you ran into a burning barn to save your chickens." Her heart was pounding again. "Zach, marry me." He dropped to one knee right there in her kitchen. "I know I do not have much. I am just a ranch hand with no property and not much money. But I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to help you build this ranch into something amazing. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want everything with you." There were tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, yes, you impossible man. Of course, yes." He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. When he finally set her down, he kissed her with a passion that made her forget everything except the feeling of his lips on hers, his hands in her hair, his body pressed against hers. "We should probably wait a bit before the wedding," she said when they came up for air. "Give people time to adjust to the idea. Or we could get married next week and let people adjust after," he countered. She laughed. "You are impossible. You love it. I love you." His expression softened. "I love you too, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." They were married on a sunny January morning in 1853, with the McAllisters standing as witnesses. It was a small ceremony, just a few close friends, but Delilah had never felt happier. Zach looked unbearably handsome in his best clothes, and the way he looked at her when she walked down the short aisle made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. Their wedding night was everything she had hoped it would be. Tender and passionate, awkward at moments, but also perfect in its imperfection. Zach was patient and attentive, making sure she felt cherished and desired. And when they finally lay tangled together in her bed, their bed now, she felt a sense of rightness that she had never experienced before. "Are you happy?" he asked, trailing his fingers down her spine. "Incredibly happy." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Are you? No regrets about settling down?" "My only regret is that I did not meet you years ago." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I was drifting because I had not found where I belonged, but I belong here, with you. I have never been more certain of anything." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. Zach continued working at the Bennett Ranch while also helping Delilah improve their own property in his spare time. She expanded her chicken operation, selling eggs in town, and slowly building up her savings again. They bought 2 more cows and talked about eventually getting some cattle of their own. It was hard work, but they were building something together, and that made all the difference. Delilah had never imagined she could be this happy. Every morning, she woke up next to her husband and felt grateful for the fire that had brought him into her life. In late spring, she started feeling ill in the mornings. At first, she thought it was something she had eaten, but when it persisted for weeks, Margaret McAllister took her aside during a visit to town. "When was your last monthly?" Margaret asked bluntly. Delilah thought about it and felt her eyes widen. Oh, congratulations, dear." Margaret hugged her warmly. "Have you told Zach yet?" "I did not even know for certain until just now." "Well, do not wait too long. Men like to have time to prepare for these things." Delilah was bursting with excitement by the time Zach got home that evening. She had planned to wait until after dinner to tell him, to find the perfect moment. But the words burst out of her the moment he walked through the door. "I am pregnant." Zach froze, his hat halfway to the hook by the door. "What?" "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." She was grinning so hard her face hurt. "Are you happy?" He crossed the room in 3 long strides and picked her up, spinning her around just like he had when she agreed to marry him. "Happy? I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic. I am terrified. When? How far along? Are you feeling all right? Should you be standing? Do you need to sit down?" She laughed at his sudden flood of questions. "I am fine. I think I'm about 2 months along, which means the baby should come in late November or early December. And yes, I can stand. I am pregnant, not made of glass. Still." He guided her to a chair with exaggerated care. "You should rest. Let me make dinner tonight. You cannot cook." "I can learn." He kissed the top of her head. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "Are you scared?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted, "but also so excited I can barely breathe. You are going to be an amazing mother. And you will be an amazing father." He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I promise I will take care of you both. Whatever it takes, I will make sure you have everything you need." "I know you will." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the summer heat made Delilah uncomfortable and irritable. Zach was endlessly patient, fetching her water, fanning her when she got too hot, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings. He was also absurdly protective, worried about her doing any task more strenuous than stirring soup. "I am not fragile," she told him repeatedly. "Women have been having babies while doing hard labor for all of human history." "That does not mean you should," he argued. "Let me do the heavy work." She appreciated his concern even when it frustrated her. The truth was, as her belly grew, she was grateful for his help. Tasks that had been easy a few months ago now left her winded and exhausted. In October, Zach came home with news. "Mr. Bennett is selling off some of his herd. I was thinking we could buy 12 head, start building up our own cattle operation. I have saved most of my wages, and with what you have put aside, we should have enough." Our own cattle? The idea was thrilling. "Would you have time to manage them while still working for Bennett?" "Actually, I was thinking I could quit, work our place full time. Between the cattle, your chickens, the vegetable garden, we could make it work. It would be tight for a while, but we would be building something that is ours." She loved the idea, loved the thought of them working side by side to build their future. "Let us do it." They bought the cattle in early November, and suddenly their small ranch felt like a real operation. Zach threw himself into the work with characteristic energy, building better fencing, improving the pasture. Delilah helped where she could, though she was moving slowly now, her belly huge and cumbersome. Their son was born on a cold night in late November, after a labor that lasted nearly 15 hours. Margaret served as midwife, coaching Delilah through the contractions while Zach paced anxiously outside. When Margaret finally opened the door to announce that he had a son, Zach practically flew into the room. Delilah was exhausted, sweaty, and more tired than she had ever been in her life. But when Zach placed their tiny son in her arms, all of that melted away. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's nose. "What should we name him?" she asked. Zach stroked one finger down their son's impossibly soft cheek. "What about Samuel, after your father?" She felt tears spring to her eyes. "You remembered?" "Of course I remembered." He kissed her forehead. "Samuel Wright Xander. Does that sound right?" "It sounds perfect." The first few months of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming and utterly wonderful. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and relatively content, but he still demanded constant attention. Delilah and Zach took turns with middle-of-the-night feedings, stumbling through exhaustion, but supporting each other through it all. Zach was a natural father, patient and gentle with their son. Delilah would often find him in the rocking chair, Samuel cradled against his chest, talking to the baby about the day's work or the weather, or nothing in particular. Those moments made her heart swell with love for both of them. Their little ranch continued to grow. The cattle thrived, and they were able to sell several head the following summer for good prices. Delilah's chicken business expanded. They scraped together enough money to add onto the house, creating a proper bedroom for Samuel and a little more living space. It was not an easy life. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and damaged equipment, injuries and setbacks. But they faced it all together, and that made the difference. Whenever Delilah felt overwhelmed or discouraged, Zach was there to remind her how far they had come. And when he struggled, she did the same for him. When Samuel was 2, Delilah got pregnant again. This time, it was a daughter, born in the spring of 1856, with Delilah's blonde hair and Zach's golden brown eyes. They named her Rose, and Samuel was instantly smitten with his baby sister. Life continued to move forward. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere. Rose was more reserved, but no less loved. In 1858, they had another son, James, and their family felt complete. The ranch prospered. They bought more land, expanded their herd, built a proper bunkhouse for the seasonal hands they sometimes hired. Delilah's chickens became locally famous, with people coming from as far as Sacramento to buy her eggs and breeding hens. Zach's reputation as a cattleman grew, and other ranchers sought his advice. Through it all, their love only deepened. Even after years of marriage, Delilah still felt a thrill when Zach came in from the fields, still loved the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. He was her partner in every sense of the word, sharing the work and the worry, the triumphs and the struggles. On quiet evenings after the children were in bed, they would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over their land. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, content in each other's presence. "Do you ever think about that day?" Delilah asked one evening. It was the summer of 1860, and their 10th wedding anniversary was approaching. "The day of the fire?" "All the time," Zach admitted. "I think about how close I came to just riding past. I almost did, you know. I saw the smoke and thought it was someone's cook fire. I almost kept going." "What made you stop?" "I am not sure. Instinct, maybe, or fate." He squeezed her hand. "I am glad I did, though. Best decision I ever made. Best thing that ever happened to me was you laughing at me for trying to save my chickens." He chuckled. "You were quite a sight, covered in soot, clutching those birds like they were made of gold, glaring at me like I was the problem. You said only I would argue with fire. And I was right. You are the stubbornest woman I have ever met." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "And I love you for it. I love you too. So much." They sat together as the stars came out, and Delilah thought about the journey that had brought them here. She had lost so much in her life, her parents, her first husband, her original barn. But from those losses had come this beautiful life with Zach and their children. She would not change a single thing, not even the fire that had nearly destroyed everything, because that fire had brought her Zach. And Zach had brought her everything else, love and partnership, family and home. a future brighter than any she could have imagined. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Samuel grew into a lanky teenager who was already showing signs of his father's height and build. At 15, he was invaluable help on the ranch, able to work alongside Zach from dawn to dusk. Rose, at 13, had inherited her mother's practical nature and business sense. She helped manage the chicken operation and had recently suggested they start raising turkeys as well, which turned out to be a lucrative venture. James, at 11, was the dreamer of the family, more interested in books and drawing than ranching, but they loved him no less for it. It was 1869 now, and California had changed dramatically since Delilah first arrived. The gold rush was long over, replaced by agriculture and industry. Towns had grown into cities. The Transcontinental Railroad had been completed that very year, connecting California to the rest of the country in ways that had seemed impossible just a decade earlier. Their ranch had changed too. What had started as a small, struggling homestead was now a prosperous cattle operation. They employed 3 full-time hands and several seasonal workers during busy times. The house had been expanded twice, and there was now a separate schoolhouse where Delilah taught not just her own children, but several of the neighbor children as well. Margaret McAllister had passed away the previous year, and Thomas had followed her within 6 months, both of them worn down by age and hard living. Their children had sold the ranch and moved to San Francisco, and Delilah still felt the loss keenly. The McAllisters had been their first friends in California, their staunchest supporters when she and Zach were just starting out. But life moved forward, as it always did. New neighbors had moved into the old McAllister place, a young family from Ohio with 3 small children. Delilah had already befriended the wife, offering advice and support just as Margaret had once done for her. On a warm evening in late August, Delilah was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Samuel came rushing in, his face flushed with excitement. "Ma, Pa just bought the Henderson place." She nearly dropped the pot she was holding. "He did what?" "The Henderson place, the property that borders ours to the south. Mr. Henderson is retiring and moving to Sacramento, and Pa bought it, all 300 acres. Delilah wiped her hands on her apron and hurried outside to find Zach. He was by the barn, talking to their foreman, and he turned with a sheepish grin when he saw her approaching. "I was going to tell you," he said. "You bought the Henderson place without discussing it with me first?" I know, but it was too good an opportunity to pass up. He was willing to sell for a fair price, and you know how much we have talked about expanding. This gives us direct access to the river, better grazing land, and room to double our herd." She wanted to be angry, but she could see the excitement in his eyes, the way he was practically vibrating with enthusiasm. This was something he had dreamed about for years. "Can we afford it?" "Just barely. We will have to be careful for a while, watch our spending. But yes, we can do it. And in a few years, once we have built up the operation on that land, we will be making double what we are now." Delilah sighed, but she was smiling. "You are still as impulsive as the day I met you. And you love it." "I tolerate it," she corrected, but she kissed him anyway. "When do we take possession?" 1st of September, 2 weeks from now. "Then I suppose we had better start planning how to manage twice as much land." The expansion kept them busy through the fall and winter. They hired more hands, moved half their herd to the new property, began improvements on the land and buildings. It was exhausting work, but it was also exhilarating. They were building something lasting, something they could pass down to their children. Samuel, now 16, took on more responsibility, managing the crew working the Henderson place with surprising maturity. Rose had started courting a young man from town, a lawyer's son with good prospects, and Delilah found herself having to accept that her daughter was growing up. James had started talking about going to university, maybe studying engineering or architecture, and while that path would take him away from the ranch, Delilah and Zach supported his dreams. On their 18th wedding anniversary, Zach surprised her with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children in charge of the ranch for a week and took the train to the city, staying in a proper hotel and eating in restaurants and attending the theater like proper city folk. "This is amazing," Delilah said as they walked along the waterfront, watching ships come and go. "But I will admit, I am ready to go home." "Already? We still have 3 more days." "I know, and this has been wonderful, but I miss the children. I miss the ranch. I miss our bed and our porch, and the sound of the cattle in the morning." She leaned against him. "Is that terribly boring?" "Not at all. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders. I feel the same way. I'm glad we came, but I will be glad to get home too. We really are old ranchers now, are we not? I suppose we are. He kissed her forehead, and I would not have it any other way. They returned to find the ranch running smoothly, and the children proud of their accomplishment, managing everything alone. Life settled back into its familiar rhythms, and the months rolled by. In 1872, when Delilah was 41 and Zach was 43, they became grandparents for the first time. Rose had married her lawyer and moved to Sacramento, and she gave birth to a healthy daughter they named Margaret after Rose's beloved godmother. Delilah cried when she held her granddaughter for the first time, overwhelmed by the continuation of their family, the next generation that would carry forward their legacy. Samuel married 2 years later to a rancher's daughter from a neighboring county. They built a house on the Henderson property and began raising their own family there, with Samuel managing that section of the operation. James did go to university studying engineering in San Francisco, but he came home every summer and never lost his connection to the ranch. As Delilah and Zach moved into their 50s, they gradually began stepping back from the day-to-day operations, letting Samuel and their foreman handle more of the work. It was strange at first, having more free time, but they adapted. Zach took up woodworking, building furniture for their growing brood of grandchildren. Delilah wrote down her recipes and memories, creating a record of their life for future generations. They were sitting on their porch one evening in 1880, watching the sunset as they had done countless times before, when Zach turned to her with a mischievous smile. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day, when I found you trying to save your chickens from the fire? I said a lot of things that day. You told me you were not arguing, you were saving." He took her hand, his thumb rubbing familiar circles on her palm. "I think about that sometimes, how you have spent your whole life saving things, saving those chickens, saving this ranch, saving me. I did not save you. You did, though. I was drifting, lost, looking for something I could not name, and then I found you, running into danger to save your chickens, and everything clicked into place." His eyes were bright with emotion. "You saved me by giving me a purpose, a home, a family. You saved me by loving me." Delilah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "You saved me too. I was alone and struggling and so tired of fighting by myself. And then you appeared and laughed at me and made me feel alive again." "Only you would argue with fire," he said softly, echoing his words from that day so many years ago. "And only you would stop to help a crazy woman trying to save chickens." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of all the years they had shared together. When they pulled apart, they sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the last light fade from the sky. "No regrets?" she asked. "Not a single one." He squeezed her hand. "You? Only that I did not have more years with you, that we did not meet sooner. We had the time we were meant to have, and we made the most of it." She could not argue with that. They had built a good life together, full of love and hard work and family. Their children were thriving. Their grandchildren were healthy and happy. The ranch they had fought so hard to save and expand would continue for generations. As the stars emerged overhead, Delilah thought back to that terrified young widow who had run into a burning barn to save her chickens, who had been so alone and desperate. She could never have imagined the life that awaited her, the love that would find her in the form of a laughing stranger on horseback. But then, the best things in life were often the ones you never saw coming. The years continued their steady march forward. In 1885, Delilah and Zach celebrated their 32nd anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a great-grandchild on the way. Samuel and his wife had 5 children now, all involved in the ranch in various ways. Rose had 4 children, 3 of whom had chosen to return to ranching rather than city life. Even James, who had made his career as an engineer in San Francisco, had built a summer house on the ranch property and came back as often as he could with his wife and 2 children. The ranch now sprawled over nearly 1,000 acres, one of the most successful cattle operations in that part of California. But for Delilah and Zach, the measure of success had never been in acres or cattle or money. It was in the family they had built, the love they had nurtured, the legacy they were leaving behind. They were in their 60s now, still healthy, but inevitably slowing down. Zach's hair had gone completely gray, and he moved with the stiffness of a man who had worked hard all his life. Delilah's hands were gnarled with arthritis. making it harder to do the fine work she had once managed with ease. But they were together, and that was what mattered. On a crisp October morning in 1889, they rode out together to the place where the old barn had once stood. It had been rebuilt so many times, expanded and improved over the decades, that little remained of the original structure Zach had helped her construct in 1852. But this spot still felt significant, the place where their story had truly begun. 37 years, Delilah said, looking around at all they had built. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime. It has been a lifetime, a good one. Zach dismounted and helped her down, his hands still strong and sure despite his age. Do you ever wish you had done things differently? Never, not once. She took his hand, and they walked slowly toward the current barn. Inside, they could hear the sounds of animals, the voices of their grandson, and several ranch hands going about the morning work. Life continuing, as it always did. This life, this family, it is everything I could have wanted. Even the hard parts, the struggles and setbacks, especially those. They made us who we are. They made us stronger. She looked up at him, at the face she had loved for nearly 4 decades. I would not trade a single moment, good or bad, because they all led us here. He pulled her into an embrace, and they stood there in the morning sunshine, 2 people who had found each other in the midst of fire and had built something beautiful from the ashes. I love you, he whispered into her hair. I have loved you from the moment you argued with that fire. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, always and forever. They stood there for a long while, holding each other, listening to the sounds of the ranch around them. This place that had started with nothing more than a small homestead and desperate determination. This place that had become a thriving operation and a home for generations. This place that represented everything they had fought for and everything they had become. Eventually, they walked back to the house, to the life that awaited them. There would be breakfast to prepare, grandchildren to spoil, work to supervise even if they were no longer doing it themselves. There would be more sunsets to watch from their porch, more quiet evenings spent in comfortable companionship, more years to add to the story they were still writing together. And when the end came, as it inevitably would, they would face it the same way they had faced everything else, together. But that end was still years away. For now, there was life to be lived, family to be cherished, and love to be celebrated. There was the ranch that had been saved by stubbornness and built by love. There were the chickens that still pecked around the yard, descendants of the ones Delilah had risked her life to save. There was the legacy of a woman who had argued with fire and won, and the man who had loved her for it. As they reached the house, their great-grandson came running up, barely 3 years old and full of energy. Zach scooped him up with a laugh, and Delilah watched the 2 of them together, her heart full to bursting. This was what they had built. Not just a ranch or a business, but a family, a future, a love that would echo through generations. Every challenge they had faced, every obstacle they had overcome, it had all been worth it for this moment, for this beautiful, messy, perfect life they had created together. Come on, she said, reaching for Zach's free hand. Let us go inside. I think someone promised to help me make cookies for all these grandchildren. I did no such thing, Zach protested, but he was smiling as he followed her in, their great-grandson chattering happily in his arms. Behind them, the ranch spread out in all directions, a testament to what could be built by 2 people who refused to give up, who chose love over fear, who believed that even from the ashes of destruction, something beautiful could grow. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the California land they had made their own. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, chickens scratched in the yard. The next generation went about their work, continuing the legacy that had begun with a fire, a stubborn woman, and a laughing cowboy who had stopped to help. And in the kitchen, Delilah and Zach made cookies with their great-grandson, their laughter mingling with the child's, creating new memories to add to all the others they had collected over their years together. It was a good life, a blessed life. And it had all started with chickens and a fire, and a stranger who had looked at her like she was something extraordinary, even covered in soot and arguing with danger itself. Only she would argue with fire, he had said, and he had loved her for it every single day since. That love had been the foundation on which they built everything. It had sustained them through droughts and disasters, through loss and hardship, through all the challenges that life on a California ranch could throw at them. It had grown deeper and stronger with each passing year, maturing from the passionate intensity of youth into the comfortable, unshakable bond of a lifetime together. As the afternoon wore on and the cookies were baked and distributed to eager grandchildren, Delilah found herself once again on the porch, watching the world go by. Zach joined her as he always did, settling into his chair with a contented sigh. "This never gets old," he said. "No," she agreed. "It really does not." They sat in silence as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear Samuel calling instructions to the ranch hands. Rose's eldest daughter was in the yard, playing with her younger siblings. James's son was in the barn, working on some mechanical project that would probably be brilliant when he was finished. The ranch lived and breathed around them, full of the people they loved and the life they had built. It was everything Delilah had dreamed of in those desperate days after the fire, when she had wondered if she would be able to hold on to her home. It was more than she had dared hope for when she had been a young widow, alone and struggling, and it had all been made possible by the man sitting beside her, the cowboy who had stopped to help and stayed to love her. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For stopping that day? For laughing at me? For staying? For loving me? For all of it?" Zach reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing the familiar pattern on her palm that had become his signature gesture over the decades. "Thank you for being worth stopping for being brave enough to argue with fire, for letting me be part of your life. It is our life now. It has been for a long time. Our life," he repeated and smiled. I liked the sound of that. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they remained where they were, hand in hand, watching the world they had built together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, as every day did. But tonight, there was only this moment of perfect contentment, of love fulfilled and dreams realized. The chickens roosted safely in their coop, descendants of the ones Delilah had saved all those years ago. The cattle settled in for the night in the strong barns that had replaced the one lost to fire. The family gathered inside the house, talking and laughing, secure in the home that had been built on a foundation of love and determination. And on the porch, two people who had found each other in the midst of flames sat together, their love as strong and steady as it had been on that first day when he had laughed and she had glared, and both of their lives had changed forever. It was a fitting end to their story, though in truth, their story would never truly end. It would continue in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It would continue in the ranch they had built and the land they had nurtured. It would continue in the love they had shared and the example they had set. But for now, in this moment, there was just this. Two people, a lifetime of love, and the simple, profound contentment of a life well lived together. "I would do it all again," Delilah said. "Every single bit of it." "So would I," Zach replied. "Only maybe next time you could try not running into burning buildings quite so enthusiastically." She laughed, the sound carrying across the evening air. "Where would be the fun in that?" "Only you," he said, shaking his head with affection. "Only you would say that. And only you would love me for it." "Damn right." They sat together as night fell completely, surrounded by the sounds of family and ranch life, wrapped in the love they had built over nearly 4 decades together. The stars shone overhead, brilliant and eternal, bearing witness to their story just as they had on countless other nights. It had been a good life, a blessed life, a life full of love and laughter, hard work and hard-won victories, family and friends, and everything that made existence worthwhile. And it had all started with a fire, some chickens, and a laughing cowboy who had looked at a soot-covered woman and seen something worth staying for. The fire had taken her barn, but it had given her everything else. She would never regret running in to save her chickens, because that moment of stubborn bravery had led to this entire beautiful life. As sleep finally claimed them and they made their way inside to bed, Delilah looked back once more at the ranch spread out in the moonlight. Her ranch, their ranch, the family ranch that would continue long after they were gone. She smiled and followed Zach inside, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, secure in the knowledge that they would face it together, as they had faced everything for the past 37 years. And if there was another fire, well, she would probably still try to save the chickens first. Some things never changed, but she knew Zach would be right there beside her, laughing at her stubbornness even as he helped her fight the flames. Because that was who they were, who they had always been. Partners, lovers, friends, soulmates, forever.